What about the possibilities for routine police access to the credit card system, the information in the credit card system, and the police routinely using it to gather suspects for a police lineup?
I'm not sure I understand that. He's talking about credit cards being used in parking meters and whether the police might take these and abuse the system.
Just in general, the police use of the information in the credit card system, dates, times, places.
Well, whether you have parking meters or not, I think that's a real threat. You know, the information that they get, and it would be identity theft. But I guess the credit card idea is so pervasive, and yet that may come to an end, because that always meant that you delayed payment and you created money with plastic. But I don't know the details of what the odds are in this city of Philadelphia abusing the credit cards of individuals because they go to parking meters. But I think the problem in general, much broader than just Philadelphia or just you know, parking meters. I worry more about what is the government going to do with a $50 billion program which is involved in Obama's health care, which means that they are going to control every medical decision and every decision on every drug you take and everything every doctor does. It is going to be monitored by bureaucrats. That is the kind of thing that I really fear. And we have a surveillance society. I said there was you know, we live with cameras. There was something on, I believe it was the news this morning or last night, that showed that a private camera caught somebody breaking in and stealing a car, and there was a city camera sitting right up here, and the city camera, the government camera, you know, wasn't working. So we spend millions and millions of dollars. That's probably the best thing that's going for us, is all this surveillance and all these controls, whether it's medical or anything. The government is so inept that they probably won't be able to do the job they think they're going to do. So the only danger is all the money we lose for them to run these inept programs.
Good morning, Ron. Thank you very much for bringing all our attention to the problem of the Fed and making it public. My question is that if by some miracle 1207 moves along and is actually signed into law, are you confident that the audit would be honest, and then who is going to audit the auditors?
Who's going? Well, that's always the fear, and yet if we get that far, and we've made a lot of progress, we're going to have benefits regardless, because we don't know how long it's going to take or whatever. Most important thing is getting the attention of the American people to look at the Federal Reserve. And right now, 75% of the American people agree with our argument that the Fed needs to be audited. But obviously, there's shortcomings in the federal government auditing it itself. The GAO happens to have a little bit of reputation than the rest of the agencies of government, and hopefully we would be able to get some good information. I don't worry as much about the GAO not making a sincere effort as I am about the Federal Reserve making a sincere effort to prohibit and to prevent and get in the way of the GAO from allowing us to find out exactly what's happening, because I'm sure there's a lot of agreements that are made that will be hard to trace. It isn't that the Federal Reserve is going to have it written on the books. Well, we did ABC in today. What they do is they talk to other central bankers, and they say, well, today I'm going to extend some loans to you as long as you go in and buy such and such stock, or buy banks, or sell gold, and do all these things. So it would be pretty hard to follow all that went on. But you're right, there could be shortcomings, but ultimately this system isn't going to last. So it's the exposure and getting the American people to understand why it's so important to know more about them. Thank you.
You mentioned something last night in your speech that, if I can borrow from that and revert a little bit, you mentioned the eventuality in healthcare that they would tell you what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. You mentioned natural foods and legislation that would take that out of the free market,
right,
put it under the FDA,
right,
supposedly, or whatever. At what point in healthcare do we draw the line and say, okay, this person is gone beyond their personal liberty, they're abusing their health, and somebody needs to turn, that person around? Maybe they're going to tell me I need to lose a few pounds. Where do we draw that line? For instance, you said go from 80% to 50% a minute ago, and that would be a compromise. Where does personal liberty end and where does responsibility begin?
Well, the question is how far do we go, and it's a personal decision. Your end point might be different than somebody else's. I felt like my end point existed about 30 years ago. And I think what I did in my own mind was I chose to speak out. I didn't really expect a political career and wasn't looking forward to it, but I wanted to speak out with the assumption that nobody was going to listen and nothing much would happen. And I always wanted to say, well, at least I made the effort. So we all here, I believe, want to continue making the effort, but we also know that when do we do something else? And that to me is, since I am not an endorser of violence, I don't like to participate in it, but I do believe in civil disobedience. I believe there is a certain time when individuals just flat out say no. So I have respect for people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, who finally said enough is enough, and they didn't take up arms. They suffered the consequences, and some people do that with the tax code and the money issues, and they go to prison over it, and that to me is rather sad. But eventually when the government quits functioning, there's going to be a lot of this. And there's civil disobedience about the drug laws right now, in spite of how hard the federal government tries to override all state laws. I mean, the use of marijuana keeps growing and growing and growing, and so there is a defiance. When the government's money doesn't work, their enforcement is going to become more difficult. But that doesn't mean they won't become more ruthless. But it's going to be up to the individuals. It may be like if Obama in the next 6 months, if there's a crisis brewing and there's riots going on, and he says, well, you've got to turn in your guns. Well, I think the American people are going to say enough is enough. I'm going to stand up to this. I'm not going to do that. Same way with gold. People have even though the numbers are still not total, but more people are understanding the issue of gold. Now they're understanding if 75% say we need to audit the Fed. Those are personal decisions, and I work to try to prevent that day when you're forced into that position, but it seems like every single day we are doing that. And of course the House passed something just recently to monitor all food products. Usually they're driven by the powerful interests, the fact that they want to regulate nutritional products because they want to protect you. You might make a bad choice. It's the drug companies that's behind that. And in medicine, it was the laboratories that came in and closed down the little laboratories in our offices because the big labs wanted us to send all the business to them. It cost the patients more, it was more inconvenient, and they say, well, you have a lab in your office because you want to make more money. But there's always a monetary motivation behind some of that. It's always the excuses, we want to take care of you. That's why we have to reject the notion that the best person to take care of oneself is that person, not the government.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Paul, for your tireless leadership on the cause of freedom. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'd like to ask you about Social Security and Medicare. The trustees' report recently said that there were $107 trillion of unfunded debt. How can we get Washington to fess up and be honest with the American people? I'm 45 years old. I know I'm never going to get paid. I want out. And I'm sure a lot of the people in this room want out. How can we get Washington to be honest and tell the American people?
Well, it's going to be difficult, but it makes one point. You want out, you're willing to assume responsibility for yourself. And it reminds me of the principle that if you have a free society and you're allowed to make your own decisions, if a group like this get together and say, We believe in socialism. We believe we should be collectivists. We'll all work for the betterment of the group, and we'll put it all in the kitty and distribute it evenly. You know, in a free society, that's legal. You can do it. But if you have a free society, or a society like we have today, will they permit us to get together and say, we want out, we don't want to have anything to do with you, you don't have to take care of us, we'll take care of ourselves? In a free society, that should be legal. I don't think we're going to address that issue. The unfunded liabilities, the only way that works to our benefit is they lose credibility. And the more they lose credibility, the more people will look for other places for answers. And that is to ourselves, to be responsible for ourselves. And that is the only way we can solve our problems.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. After reading Thomas Wood's book, Meltdown, I recently had a conversation with my father, who is an old-school Republican, although he's very disenchanted with the party right now.